November 1960. Cody, Wyoming. A boot and saddle shop on Sheridan Avenue, 2 blocks west of the Buffalo Bill Center, where the Absaroka Range fills the end of every east-facing street, and the November wind comes off the high country cold enough to remind a man what month it is. The landlord arrives at 9 in the morning with a locksmith. His name was Arlen Pease, and he owned the building at 412 Sheridan Avenue, and he had a right to be there. The lease on the shop contained a clause in its 3rd paragraph that allowed the landlord to take possession upon 60 days of arrears, without further notice, provided a locksmith was present. The rent was $85 a month. Gideon Marsh was 3 months and 15 days behind, $297.25, which Arlen Pease had calculated to the penny and written on the August notice. And Gideon had not been able to pay because the summer had gone slow, and he had spent what he had on leather rather than rent. Because leather kept the orders alive in a way that empty shelves did not. Arlen Pease had the clause. He had the locksmith. At 9:07 in the morning, he changed the lock on a door of a shop that a man had spent 19 years building. And by the terms of the lease, he did it within his rights. Here is the story. The shop had been Gideon Marsh's for 19 years. He came back from a journeyman in Billings in 1941, a young man of 23 with a certificate from a master cobbler in Miles City and a set of tools wrapped in oilcloth that had belonged to his teacher and been passed to him when the old man's hands finally gave out. He opened the shop on Sheridan Avenue in a space that had been a harness repair, still faintly redolent of horse sweat and neatsfoot oil, and he spent the first month scrubbing the walls and laying in his stock and setting up his bench the way his teacher had taught him. Tools in order of use, left to right, everything within reach, nothing wasted in a reach. He made boots the old way. He cut the pattern from measurements he took himself, lasting the upper by hand, stitching the welt with waxed linen thread on a curved needle, building the heel in stacked leather layers, finishing the sole with a burnishing bone until the edge was smooth enough to reflect light. A pair of Marsh boots took 3 weeks from measurement to the last coat of beeswax. They cost more than factory boots and lasted longer, and the men who wore them knew the difference and came back. The shop smelled of tanned leather and beeswax and the sharp mineral bite of edge dressing, with something underneath that was simply the smell of work, hide and linen, and the warmth of a wood stove in a room where a man has been at a bench for years, accumulating in the walls the way honest work does. The north wall held lasts in every size. Wooden forms worn smooth from handling, hung on dowels floor to ceiling. The workbench was scarred pine, 30 years old when Gideon bought it from the harness man. The stove in the corner ticked when it was warming and went quiet when it found its temperature. In winter the cold came under the front door, and the stove fought it all day. Gideon had a daughter named Clara, who was 12 in 1960. His wife, Anna, had died in 1954. He had run the shop alone since, taking measurements and cutting patterns and keeping the accounts himself. He had regulars among the Park County ranchers who ordered 2 pairs every 4 years and returned the worn ones for resoling. He had made boots for 3 rodeo champions whose names he did not tell and would not tell, because a man's boot order was his business and not a story to trade on. Some of you know what it means to be the last man in a county who does something the right way. Some of you have worn something made by a man like Gideon Marsh and understood in the wearing of it what craft actually costs. The slow summer had not been his fault. A dude ranch outside Cody that had accounted for 8 pairs of custom boots a year closed in June 1960 when its owner retired to Arizona. 2 of Gideon's 4 core rancher customers had cut their ordering in half because the cattle prices had dropped and they were watching every dollar. He had done nothing wrong. The margin simply went thin, and when it went thin, the rent was the thing that slipped. because leather kept the orders alive, and orders were the only thing that would eventually get the rent paid. He had gone to Arlen Pease in September and explained this. Arlen Pease was not unreasonable in his private life. He managed his 4 buildings on Sheridan Avenue with efficiency. And efficiency meant that a clause which had been triggered had to be enforced, or it meant nothing. He said he was sorry about the slow summer. He said if Gideon could pay half the arrears by October 15th, he would hold the clause 30 more days. Gideon paid $120 in October, which was not half. Arlen Pease accepted it without comment, and then exercised the clause at month's end anyway, because $120 of $297.25 was not half, and the clause did not require him to accept partial satisfaction. The locksmith arrived with Arlen Pease at 9:07 on a Tuesday morning in November. Gideon Marsh was inside the shop. He had opened at 8 and had been at the bench since 8:15 on a pair of boots for a rancher named Hollis, who had been waiting 6 weeks, and whose deadline was the end of the month. He heard the knock. He heard Arlen Pease say through the door that he was there to exercise the lease provision and that Gideon should gather what he needed before the lock was changed. Gideon came to the door. He stood in it. He looked at Arlen Pease and the locksmith and did not say anything for a moment. Then he went back to the bench and wrapped Hollis's half-finished boots in brown paper and put them in the order box. He took his tools from the bench one at a time, the curved needles, the lasting pliers, the burnishing bone, the awl, and wrapped them in the same oilcloth his teacher had used, tied with a length of welting thread. He took his coat from the hook by the door. He picked up the bundle and the box. He walked out. He stood on the sidewalk on Sheridan Avenue with his tools in his arms and the order box under one elbow, and he watched the locksmith work. The man at the hardware store 2 doors down had come to his doorway. A woman from the dry goods across the street had stopped on the sidewalk and was watching without pretending not to. 3 men who had been passing on their way to the feed store at the end of the block had stopped. Nobody said anything. Nobody moved. The street held still the way a street holds still when something is being done that everyone present knows is wrong, and no one present can prove it. You know that stillness. The kind that comes when everything is legal and nothing is right. Where are you watching from? Drop your state in the comments. I want to see how far this story reaches. The man who had parked the dark brown station wagon at the far end of the block at 8:30 had walked up Sheridan Avenue toward the Buffalo Bill Center before Arlen Pease arrived. He had come to Cody for 2 days of elk hunting in the high country east of the Shoshone and had gone to the center because he liked the collection and he liked to look at things that were well made. He was walking back down the avenue when he saw the locksmith at the door and the man on the sidewalk with his arms full. He stopped at the far end of the gathering. He leaned against the front of the hardware store and looked at Gideon Marsh on the sidewalk, at the tools and oilcloth, at the order box, at Gideon's face, which had not changed. The face of a man who is not going to let a street full of witnesses see what this is costing him. He stayed there until the locksmith was done and Arlen Pease had locked up, and both of them were in Arlen Pease's car and gone. Then he walked to where Gideon was standing. He said, "Those your tools?" Gideon said they were. He said, "You make boots." It was not a question. He had looked at the oilcloth bundle and the lasting pliers handle showing at one end, and he knew what a lasting pliers handle looked like. Gideon said he did. The man looked at the locked door. He looked at the new lock. He looked back at Gideon. He said, "I need a place to sit down, and I expect you could use a cup of coffee. Is there somewhere close?" They went to the diner on the next block. The man ordered coffee for both of them, and he listened, while Gideon told him the short version, the slow summer, the Dude Ranch closing, the missed rent, the clause, the $297.25. He did not interrupt. He did not ask questions he did not need the answers to. When Gideon was done, the man was quiet for a moment. He turned his coffee cup on the saucer once, the way a man turns something over when he is thinking rather than fidgeting. Then he reached into his coat and took out a small leather notebook and a pen. He said, "I'd like to place an order." Gideon looked at him. He said, "I have a ranch in Arizona. I need boots for the men who work it. Proper boots, made right, the kind that last." He opened the notebook. "I'm going to need 10 pairs. Working boots, not dress boots. The kind a man can stand in all day and still have his feet at the end of it." He wrote something in the notebook and tore the page out and put it on the table between them. "That's the deposit. The rest on delivery." The page had a number on it. The number was $3,000. Gideon Marsh has not moved. His face has not changed. He is looking at the number, and then he is looking at the man, and the man is drinking his coffee the way a man drinks coffee when he has already finished his thinking and is simply waiting for the other party to catch up. Gideon said, "That's more than 10 pairs of boots." The man said, "I know what 10 pairs of boots cost. The difference is for the shop. A man can't make boots on a sidewalk." He set down the cup. "I need a bootmaker with a workbench and a stove and enough room to do the work right. You're the man. That's the shop. I expect you can work out the arithmetic from there." Gideon Marsh went to Arlen Pease that afternoon. He paid the $297.25 arrears in full, and 3 months in advance besides, which came to $552.25, with enough left to carry through winter and into the spring orders. He went back to the shop on Wednesday morning with a new key, because the lease required the landlord to provide one upon settlement of arrears, and Arlen Pease did what the lease required. The lock was new, but the door was the same door. Gideon hung his coat on the same hook. He set his tools back on the bench in the same order, left to right. He lit the stove. He unwrapped Hollis's boots and set them under the bench lamp and looked at where he had left off. He ran the shop for 26 more years. He paid the lease current from that day forward, without exception, because he had learned what it cost to let it slip. He took on an apprentice in 1964, a young man from Thermopolis named Decker, with good hands and patience for the slow parts, which is the harder thing to teach. Decker was a full partner by 1971. Clara came back from the University of Wyoming in 1966 with a business degree and took over the accounts her father had kept alone since Anna died. She found 3 years of underbilling in the ledger, corrected it, and the margin improved enough that a slow summer was uncomfortable rather than fatal. Think about what a deposit slip for $3,000 on a diner table in November 1960 became. Gideon ran the shop from that morning through 1986. 26 more years of boots made the right way in a shop on Sheridan Avenue. 26 more winters with the stove going. 26 more springs when the ranchers came in with their measurements. Decker opened his own shop in Jackson in 1977. Clara ran the accounts until Gideon retired. The 10 pairs of working boots were delivered to an Arizona ranch in the spring of 1961, on time and made right. The man wore his own pair for 9 years before sending them back by mail with a note that said, "The heel on the left." Gideon resold them and sent them back without charging for the shipping, because a man who had placed a $3,000 order on a diner table had earned that much, and Gideon Marsh did not fail to settle a debt. On the north wall of the shop at 4 Phelps Nile at Sheridan Avenue, a Western wear store now, same building, the rows of wooden lasts are gone, replaced by hat racks and jacket display hooks. But the dowels they hung on are still in the wall, because whoever remodeled decided the pine was worth keeping, and the dowels were set too deep to pull. If you know what you are looking for, you can see them running floor to ceiling behind the merchandise, the original spacing unchanged. The wood darkened where generations of lasting forms left their impression. On the south wall, near the window, there is a framed photograph the current owner found in a box in the back room and had framed because it seemed to belong on the wall. It shows Gideon Marsh at his workbench in the 1970s, bent over a last with an awl in his hand, the stove visible in the corner, the north wall of lasts behind that. The afternoon light comes through the same south window and lies across the photograph the same way it always did. The dowels are still in the wall. If you find yourself in Cody, the building is on Sheridan Avenue, 2 blocks west of the Buffalo Bill Center, the stone-faced one with the wide front window. The Western Wear Store keeps regular hours. The photograph is on the south wall near the window, at eye level. You will know it, because it is the only thing in the room that looks like it has always been there, because it has. Some of you have known a craftsman like this, someone who made things right and slowly and by hand, and who asked nothing from anyone, and whose work outlasted everything that tried to end it. This story is for them. John Wayne never told anyone, not the name of the shop, not the man on the sidewalk with his tools in his arms, not the diner or the deposit or the number on it. He hunted the Shoshone High Country the following 2 days and drove south out of Cody on a Thursday morning and said nothing to the men who had traveled with him. Nothing in any interview in the years that followed. Nothing in any letter that has been found. What is known is what Clara wrote in the margin of the shop's 1961 order ledger, beside the entry for 10 pairs of working boots. Arizona delivery, a single line in her careful accountant's hand, order placed by a stranger in November, deposit paid in full, no forwarding address given. That ledger is in a box at the Park County Historical Society. The entry is on page 41. A man came down Sheridan Avenue on his way back from looking at things that were well made. He saw a craftsman standing on a sidewalk with his tools in his arms. He stopped. He did not speak first. He walked to the diner and ordered 2 coffees, and he listened. Then he took out a notebook, and he placed an order for 10 pairs of boots, and he wrote a number on a page and put it on the table and drank his coffee and waited for the arithmetic to finish itself. He did not explain. He did not need to. Some things are stated in the doing of them, and that was all the statement this one needed. That is most of how it ever got out, at all. If this story meant something to you, subscribe. There is another one like it every week. And unfortunately, they don't make men like John Wayne anymore.